Helen, Arthur, Veronica, Sarah, Diane, Michael, George, Joanne. The champagne flute felt cold and alien in my hand, its delicate, borrowed elegance a stark contrast to the familiar, work-roughened feel of my own skin that still bore the faint, papery thinness of recent, profound illness. It was a constant reminder, this slight tremor in my fingers, this occasional shortness of breath, reminders of how close out around me. The grand ballroom of the Ashton Hotel glittered. A chandelier-lit ocean of expensive fabrics, silk that shimmered, cashmere that draped softly, expertly tailored wool that spoke of quiet wealth, mingling with polite, brittle laughter that never quite reached the eye. A glittering monument to endurance, ambition, and, it was becoming increasingly, sickeningly clear as the evening wore on, a profoundly selective, carefully curated memory. Our 30th anniversary, though listening to the man currently holding court at the podium, radiating success like my husband, Arthur Rutherford, 69 but still possessing the leonine posture, the impeccably silvered hair meticulously styled, and the easy, practiced charisma that had first charmed, then captivated, then ultimately consumed me nearly 4 decades ago, beamed under the spotlight. His voice, trained over years of presentations to skeptical city councils and demanding corporate clients, resonated through the opulent space. He spoke of innovation, of legacy, his legacy, of navigating treacherous market currents with a steady hand on the tiller. He painted himself as the captain, the sole visionary, the indispensable man at the helm of this magnificent vessel. I am Helen Rutherford, 68. 2 years ago my heart, apparently weary of decades spent beating reliably, uncomplainingly, almost invisibly in the background, much like myself, I now reflected with a pang of corrosive bitterness, stage a dramatic, terrifying, near-fatal protest. Doctors, skilled and commendably serious, used phrases like touch and go, remarkable recovery, and eventually, when I stubbornly refused to succumb, miracle. I preferred obstinate. I had clawed my way back from the precipice, fighting through waves of nauseating pain, through dizzying weakness so profound it felt like gravity itself had intensified its cruel hold on my limbs. I had relearned how to breathe without the tight, terrifying band of fear constricting my chest, how to walk across a room without the floor tilting like the deck of a storm-tossed ship, how to simply be again, in a body that felt both intimately familiar and terrifyingly alien, permanently altered. And now here I was, clad in a tasteful but deliberately unremarkable navy blue dress Arthur had vaguely approved, with a distracted wave of his hand. Fine, Helen, whatever you think best. Playing the part I had perfected over 30 long years, the supportive spouse, the quiet, unassuming presence beside the great man, the living embodiment of domestic stability that supposedly allowed his genius to flourish, all the while feeling more profoundly, terrifyingly invisible than I had even in the depths of the CCU, adrift in a sea of tubes and flickering readouts. At least there, my existence, precarious as it was charted, monitored, measured, undeniably present. Here, in this glittering ballroom celebrating our life's work, I felt like a ghost haunting my own history, unseen, unacknowledged, the alleged, uncredited, and apparently entirely forgotten co-founder of the architectural firm that bore only his name. Arthur was nearing the crescendo of his meticulously rehearsed speech, his voice swelling with perfectly modulated, utterly convincing emotion. He thanked the board, a collection of mostly interchangeable gray suits representing old money and established connections, who nodded sagely, basking in the reflected glory. He thanked the investors, whose faith, secured years ago by meticulously researched data-heavy proposals I had largely drafted, refined, and defended in tense preliminary meetings while Arthur focused on the big picture, had fueled their early, crucial growth phases. He thanked the tireless young associates, the bright, ambitious sparks whose names he occasionally remembered, the ones currently burning the midnight oil, sacrificing their weekends just as we had done decades ago, fueled by lukewarm coffee and impossible dreams in the cramped, damp basement apartment that served as our first office. He spoke glowingly of shared late nights, conveniently omitting who usually stayed latest, sorting out the administrative chaos, of unwavering dedication, mostly his apparently, of a shared commitment to architectural excellence, his designs, my logistical support. And of course, he paused dramatically, a showman's trick he'd perfected, allowing the anticipation in the room to build, turning slightly, his practiced smile widening as he sought out and locked onto a specific face in the crowd. This past year, this incredible leap forward, this bold, decisive push into the challenging international market, this new dynamism that promises to define our next exciting chapter, none of it, absolutely none of it, would have been possible without the foresight, the energy, the sheer strategic brilliance of my partner Veronica Shaw. He gestured expansively, a magician revealing his star assistant, the one who truly made the magic happen. Veronica, positioned strategically near the stage, as if awaiting her cue, regal in knife-sharp crimson silk that seemed to absorb and reflect the ballroom's light, acknowledged the ensuing, perhaps slightly too enthusiastic applause, with a graceful inclination of her head. It was a masterful performance of calculated modesty, subtly deflecting the praise while simultaneously absorbing its implied power. 40-something, driven, undeniably intelligent, I had recognized that dangerous combination from the moment Arthur, citing the need for fresh blood and contemporary vision, brought her into the firm 5 years ago, ostensibly as a senior associate to head the new and admittedly successful contemporary design division. But I had also sensed, even then, beneath the polished veneer of professional competence, a ruthlessness that felt like polished steel, an ambition that seemed to have no ceiling, no boundaries. Her dark hair was swept back from a face that was striking, angular, aesthetically pleasing in a way that felt almost architectural itself, and utterly, unnervingly unreadable. Her eyes, obsidian sharp, briefly, almost accidentally swept across the room and met mine. There was no warmth, no shared understanding, not even the thinnest veneer of professional courtesy. Only a cool, clear, unmistakable glint of, what? Triumph? Yes, certainly that was present, a victor surveying the spoils, but also, perhaps, pity, that possibility, the condescending idea that this usurper, this latecomer to the empire had helped build brick by painstaking brick, pitied me, the original architect of its survival, stung more than outright hostility ever could. 5 years. 5 short years she had been here, navigating the corporate corridors with startling speed, charming the board members with her sharp analysis and undeniable results, whispering strategies and market insights in Arthur's increasingly receptive ear. 5 years that had apparently, in Arthur's public narrative, and perhaps now in actual fact, eclipsed, negated, 30 long years of foundational work, 30 years of my life, my energy, my sacrifice. Arthur, basking now in the reflected glory of Veronica's universally acknowledged brilliance, continued his litany of thanks, seemingly oblivious to the undercurrents swirling in the room, or perhaps simply choosing to ignore them. He thanked Gary from accounting, again whose primary contribution over the years, beyond his encyclopedic knowledge of obscure baseball statistics, seemed to be his uncanny ability to locate missing receipts from Arthur's expense reports. He thanked the current crop of bright-eyed interns who fetched coffee, wrestled with the large family printers, and dreamed of one day being Arthur Rutherford, or perhaps now Veronica Shaw. He even offered a charming, slightly patronizing thank you to the catering staff for the exquisite, admittedly delicious, canapes circulating on silver trays. My name, Helen Rutherford, the woman who had not only balanced the first chaotic budgets on a borrowed card table in our damp, cramped basement apartment, while nursing our infant son, Caleb, but had also designed the initial robust bookkeeping system the firm still used, albeit in a heavily digitized and expanded format. Plentichoke sister skeptical, her fingers crusting skeptical hotel magnate, into giving their fledgling known firm their first major break with the Henderson Hotel's downtown renovation project, a project Arthur himself had nearly blown with his artistic temperament during the initial pitch. The woman who had quietly, without fanfare, without seeking acknowledgement, poured every single cent of her parents' modest life insurance payout, $50,000, 0 cents, a staggering, terrifying sum for us then, money earmarked for our own future security, enough to cover payroll and rent for 6 critical months, into the company during the brutal recession of '98, when Arthur, defeated, despairing, seeing only ruin ahead, was literally drawing up bankruptcy papers in our small kitchen. My name remained unuttered, not relegated to a supporting role, not minimized or downplayed, simply gone, vanished, erased from the official record being inscribed tonight in this glittering hall, as if I had never existed beyond being the woman who shared his bed, raised his son, managed his household, and occasionally poured coffee with a gracious smile at client meetings. It wasn't just an oversight fueled by the excitement of the moment, a forgivable lapse in the flow of prepared remarks. I knew Arthur too well. He was meticulous when it served him. This was a deliberate public declaration, a ratification of a narrative he had been subtly weaving for years, perhaps even decades. In 30 years, he'd never truly championed my contribution publicly, always defaulting to vague, dismissive platitudes about my supportive wife, allowing, even encouraging, others, clients, board members, employees, to assume my role was purely domestic, peripheral, comfortably supportive but ultimately non-essential to the firm's core success. But tonight felt different, sharper, more absolute, more final, especially after everything we'd supposedly weathered together with my illness just 2 years prior. That shared, terrifying brush with mortality should have forged a deeper bond, a renewed appreciation for life, for each other. We should have emerged grateful, close. Instead, it seemed to have provided him with the perfect ammunition, the perfect narrative justification for my sidelining. Helen's frail now. Helen's energy is diminished. Helen needs to rest. Helen's significant contributions are historical, not current. Time to look to the future. Time to pass the torch. To look to Veronica. The applause following his speech felt like a physical force, pressing the air from my lungs, making the opulent room swim slightly, the glittering chandeliers blurring into indistinct smears of light. I clapped automatically, my hands stinging from the repeated impact, the rhythmic sound echoing the frantic, panicked beat of my own heart. I forced my lips into a smile, a brittle facsimile of spousal pride I had perfected over decades, a mask honed through countless dinners listening to him hold court, countless events where I stood slightly behind him, nodding pleasantly. I prayed it looked genuine, prayed no one saw the sudden, chilling desolation behind my eyes. Old George Hansen, bless his observant, loyal, strangely clumsy heart, clearly saw something, or perhaps simply remembered the truth. His attempt later, near the wilting orchestra pit as the evening wound down, to remind Arthur of my pivotal role in landing the Henderson deal was telling. George, who had supplied our first batches of substandard lumber on hesitant credit, when absolutely no one else would trust two young, unknown architects with more ambition than capital, hadn't forgotten those lean, desperate years. He remembered me, Helen Marsden then, wrestling with overdue invoices in their dusty lumberyard office, negotiating payment terms with a quiet determination that surprised even myself, ensuring his bills eventually got paid, even when our own bank account was perilously close to zero. Arthur's smooth, practiced deflection, his casual relegation of my critical negotiation skills to merely keeping the home fires burning while I was out slaying dragons, wasn't just dismissive. It was a calculated, condescending lie, designed to reinforce the carefully constructed narrative he was now selling to himself and the world. She tended the hearth while I conquered the world. The sheer, staggering, breathtaking arrogance of it stole what little breath I had left. I had not only tended the hearth, I had built the damn fireplace with my own two hands, sourced the stones when we couldn't afford quarry prices, mixed the mortar with dwindling funds, and chopped the firewood myself, all while he was out sketching blueprints for mythical castles in the air, oblivious to the imminent threat of freezing. I needed air, urgently, desperately, murmuring a vague excuse about needing water, or perhaps just needing to escape the suffocating weight of the room, to the couple beside me engrossed in a tedious discussion about organic gardening awards. I slipped through a heavy oak side door, escaping the oppressive heat, and found myself blessedly alone on a deserted stone balcony. The cool, damp night air of late October hit my face like a welcome splash of icy water, shocking after the overheated, perfume-laden atmosphere of the ballroom. Below, the city lights spread out like scattered jewels on black velvet, indifferent, impersonal. Vast. I leaned heavily against the cold, damp stone balustrade, dragging deep, ragged breaths into my protesting lungs, trying to quell the tremor that had returned to my hand with a vengeance, a physical manifestation of the internal earthquake shaking my foundation. The quiet click of the door opening behind me made my shoulders tense. I didn't need to turn around. The scent, expensive, complex, slightly spicy Veronica's signature fragrance, instantly recognizable, impossible to ignore, announced her arrival before her quiet, confident foot did on the stone tile. "Quite a view," she commented, her voice smooth as polished silk, stopping beside me, though maintaining a careful, almost calculated professional distance. She held a martini glass, perfectly chilled, the single olive gleaming within like a malevolent green eye. "Arthur gives a wonderful speech, doesn't he? Truly inspiring. He possesses such remarkable vision." The compliment was aimed at him, but the delivery felt like a subtle barb aimed at me. "He's very dedicated to the firm's success," I managed, keeping my own voice admirably even, neutral, betraying none of the turmoil raging within. My own words, praising him even now, tasted like ashes on my tongue. "Indeed." She took a delicate, precise sip of her drink, her eyes surveying the cityscape, assessing it perhaps for future development opportunities. "He mentioned earlier you weren't feeling entirely yourself tonight, Helen. He worries about you, you know. I do hope the excitement hasn't been too much for you. It must be quite tiring attending these large, demanding events, especially—" She paused, letting the word hang delicately in the air. "Since your illness." There it was again, the deliberate yet oh-so-subtle, perfectly deniable emphasis, the casual reminder of my physical frailty, my prolonged absence from the office during recovery, my supposed diminished capacity now. She wielded my recent vulnerability like a surgeon wields a scalpel, precise, effective, leaving barely a visible mark but cutting deep nonetheless. A surge of cold, clarifying anger, surprisingly potent after the initial shock and numbness, cut through the fog of despair. I turned slowly to face her, deliberately meeting her cool, appraising gaze. Let her see the resilience, not the frailty. "On the contrary, Veronica," I said, my voice steadier now, imbued with a newfound firmness. "I'm feeling remarkably resilient, stronger in many ways than I felt before." I allowed myself a small, tight, challenging smile. "Illness has a way of stripping away non-essentials, wouldn't you say? It clarifies one's priorities remarkably well, helps one see things, people, situations, much more clearly." Her answering smile was technically flawless, a masterpiece of social engineering, yet it didn't reach her eyes, which remained cold, watchful. "Clarity is paramount," she agreed smoothly, refusing to acknowledge the challenge in my tone. "In life, and most especially in business, ensuring everyone involved fully understands their specific role, their current value." The unspoken message, the subtext, hung heavy and poisonous in the chilled night air between us. "And your role, Helen, is firmly, irrevocably in the past, your current value negligible, your appropriate position obsolete, irrelevant, comfortably pensioned off if you behave." "Absolutely," I replied, holding her gaze for a beat longer, refusing to be the first to look away, refusing to concede this silent, undeclared territory, and ensuring that historical contributions, the very foundations upon which all current success and any ambitious future plans are necessarily built, aren't conveniently forgotten or deliberately buried under newer, shinier layers of. For a fleeting, almost imperceptible instant, a flicker of something sharp, undisguised, annoyance, impatience, contempt, crossed her perfectly composed features before being instantly smoothed away, replaced once more by that impenetrable professional mask. "Of course," she murmured, her tone becoming slightly bored, as if indulging a slightly senile relative. "History is always important, as context, naturally." She finished her martini in one swift, elegant swallow, a gesture that somehow managed to feel both dismissive and final, as if concluding a slightly tedious, unimportant business negotiation she had easily won. "Well, I really should get back inside. Arthur will be wondering where I am. Do take care of yourself, Helen. Rest is so important. She gave me a brief, almost imperceptible nod, the kind one gives to the hired help, the departing cleaning lady, and swept back into the glittering, noisy ballroom, leaving me alone again with the indifferent city lights, the damp night air, and the cold, hard, undeniable, devastating truth of my own erasure, planned and executed while I fought for my very breath. They weren't just minimizing my role. They weren't just overlooking my contributions. They were actively, strategically, ruthlessly replacing me, rewriting our shared history to fit their narrative of progress and necessity. And Arthur, my husband of nearly 40 years, the man whose dreams I had naively, foolishly adopted as my own, the man for whom I had sacrificed my own nascent career ambitions without a second thought. He was not just letting it happen. He was complicit. He was, I suspected with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, the primary architect of my obsolescence. He was handing Veronica the keys to the kingdom we had built together, stone by painful stone, while simultaneously preparing to quietly, efficiently lock me out in the cold, armed with the justification of my own failing health. The irony was so bitter it threatened to choke. The drive home unfolded in a silence thicker, more suffocating than the late-night fog now rolling in thick blankets from the unseen lake. Arthur hummed tunelessly again, that grating little habit he indulged when he felt particularly pleased with himself, seemingly entirely oblivious to the yawning, unbridgeable chasm that had opened between us on the plush, ridiculously expensive leather seats of his late-model German sedan. Yet another gleaming symbol of the success I was apparently never truly a part of creating. I stared fixedly out my passenger window, the familiar manicured streets of our affluent suburban neighborhood blurring into meaningless hostile shapes. Hardly the cornerstone. The phrase echoed relentlessly, bouncing off the expensive walnut trim, ricocheting around the silent car, lodging themselves like jagged shards of ice deep in my chest cavity, near the still healing tissues of my heart. Back in the house. His house, wasn't it? Truly. Bought with profits I had helped generate through endless unpaid hours, decorated with art I had painstakingly chosen to reflect a sophistication he craved but didn't inherently possess, managed down to the last meticulously organized detail by me for decades, freeing him to focus solely on his vision. The charade of normalcy continued, albeit with a new, chilling organ jacket off, tossed carelessly onto a priceless antique chair, had found and lovingly restored it. Keys dropped with a self-important clink onto the antique mahogany hall table. Had refinished it myself years ago when we couldn't afford professionals. A brief distracted murmur about needing to check a few urgent overseas emails before disappearing, predictably, into the inner sanctum of his personal domain, the nerve center from which he now directed his expanding world, a world in which I, it seemed, was no longer a citizen, merely a resident alien, awaiting deportation. I stood alone in the vast, echoing designer kitchen, the gleaming stainless steel appliances and polished black granite counterpuff reflecting my solitary, suddenly diminished figure like mocking funhouse mirrors. 30 years, more than 30 years poured into him, into this company, into this shared life, and for what? To end up a footnote in my own story, an inconvenient, slightly embarrassing historical context he needed to manage? That night sleep was an impossibility. Restless, I prowled the silent, overly large house like a caged animal, my own history unspooled behind my eyes, vivid and unwelcome. Before Arthur, before Rutherford Designs, before Helen Rutherford, the endlessly supportive, increasingly visible wife. I had been Helen Marsden then, sharp, ambitious, top of my MBA class at Northwestern, already making waves as a junior executive in the fiercely competitive world of commercial banking downtown. I had plans. I had goals. I envisioned shattering glass ceilings, not polishing my husband's trophies. Then I met Arthur, introduced by mutual friends. Magnetic, devastatingly charming, overflowing with architectural visions that seemed genuinely destined to reshape the city skyline. He was brilliant, undeniably talented, but disorganized, impractical, hopeless with finances. He needed help, he'd confessed over candlelit dinners, his eyes earnest and imploring. Someone organized, someone practical who understood the unforgiving language of numbers as well as the elegant poetry of aesthetics. Someone to be his true partner, he'd emphasized, in life and in work. Someone to handle the mundane realities so his genius could take flight. I, young, idealistic, already half in love with his passion and potential, believed him, against the advice of my concerned father. He seems like a dreamer, Helen. Make sure you protect yourself. I quit my promising banking job. I poured all my energy, my financial acumen, my organizational skills, my inheritance when my parents passed unexpectedly young, my entire life into his dream, naively assuming I was making it ours. When had ours fractured? Subtly at first, then irrevocably, into solely his. When had partner devolved into supportive wife, then faded further into bookkeeper, and finally, tonight, been publicly demoted to irrelevant historical context? Had the signs been there all along, ignored in my hopeful blindness? The casual way he dismissed my suggestions in front of clients? The way he took sole credit for breakthroughs achieved through collaborative effort? The anniversaries forgotten, the family milestones missed because of critical work deadlines that always seemed more important than us? Yes, the signs had been there. I simply hadn't wanted to see them. Sleep remained elusive. Lying rigidly beside Arthur's oblivious, gently snoring form, the vast expanse of the king-size mattress between us felt like a desolate, icy tundra. His earlier email draft, the one casually outlining the restructuring and my forthcoming amicable but minimal settlement, pulsed behind my closed eyelids like a toxic neon sign. He was cynically, cruelly weaponizing my illness, the very shared vulnerability that should have bound us closer, using it as pragmatic justification to discard me. He was using my desperate, hard-won fight for my very life as a convenient excuse to steal the remainder of the life I had left. A new kind of tremor started deep within me then, fierce and unexpected. Not the physical echo of my damaged, healing heart, but the deep, resonant vibration of a cold, diamond-hard rage crystallizing rapidly in the core of my soul. Before the first hint of gray dawn touched the expensive silk curtains, propelled by this chilling new energy, I slipped silently out of bed. Again, this time, there was no hesitation, no internal debate about propriety. Barefoot and silent as a wraith on the thick, unforgiving Persian carpets, I crept purposefully towards his office. The door was firmly closed tonight. Locked. Of course. He wasn't entirely foolish, but years of managing his chaotic life meant I knew all his secrets, including the location of the spare key, tucked discreetly inside a hollowed-out, oversized architectural monograph on Louis Sullivan carelessly shelved in the adjoining library, amongst dozens of similar volumes. My fingers, surprisingly steady now, retrieved it without fumbling. The lock clicked softly, obediently under my touch. I was inside his fortress. His computer screensaver glowed again, passively illuminating the meticulously organized, offensively large desk. I bypassed it. My target tonight was older technology, less conspicuous. The cabinet bore a dusty label, printed in my own neat hand from over a decade ago. The top drawer slid open with a low, reluctant groan, releasing the unmistakable scent of aging paper, dried ink, and forgotten history. Files crammed tightly together, labeled with long-lost project names, defunct client accounts. My fingers, surprisingly nimble, flew through the tabs. Henderson Hotels, Kensington Group, City Revitalization Phase 1, and then my heart gave a painful home leap. A thick, slightly battered manila folder labeled simply, starkly, Helen Marsden, my maiden name, my initials from before our wedding ceremony, legally simply subsumed my identity into his. My hands shook uncontrollably now as I lifted the precious folder out. Inside, nestled amongst faded blueprints and preliminary sketches, a treasure trove far more valuable than anything Arthur currently displayed in his office. It wasn't just my memory, it was tangible proof. My original employment contract? No, even better. It was a partnership agreement drafted on an old clunky electric typewriter we'd bought secondhand, dated April 1993, just months before we incorporated. It meticulously outlined profit-sharing percentages, a significant minority stake for me, but undeniably equity, detailed my specific areas of operational and financial authority, even addressed intellectual property rights generated during our collection. It clearly, unequivocally named Helen Marsden as a founding partner. And there, at the bottom, above the typed names, two signatures, faded but distinct. Arthur Rutherford, bold and slightly flamboyant even then, and mine, Helen Marsden, neat, precise, full of cautious optimism. We'd signed it in our tiny kitchen, full of shared dreams and cheap wine before the relentless demands of the business and raising Caleb began to erode that initial, hopeful equality, a document Arthur had conveniently forgotten existed, perhaps even deliberately buried here amongst the irrelevant archives, assuming I'd never look or never remember its significance. Beneath the partnership agreement, more ammunition, clear photocopies of the bank deposit slips and transfer documents showing the $50,000 0-cent inheritance from my parents flowing directly from my personal account into the dangerously depleted Rutherford Designs business account, clearly designated in the memo line as Partner Capital Contribution. Marsden? Correspondence from our first, long-retired lawyer confirming the initial partnership structure before incorporation. Memos I had written in those early years outlining business strategies, cash flow projections, client retention plans, strategies Arthur later presented as his own brilliant insights in board meetings. It wasn't just my word against his carefully constructed narrative anymore. It was black and white, faded ink on aging paper, but irrefutable proof. Clutching the HM folder like a shield, I moved swiftly to his main current filing system, the sleek modern cabinets containing the recent history. Searching now with renewed purpose, fueled by adrenaline and righteous fury, my fingers flew through the alphabetically ordered files. And there it was, tucked innocuously between holidays and insurance, the slim manila folder labeled vaguely, deceptively, hobby expenses. I already knew from the glimpse of the emails what horror lay within. But seeing the official printed bank statements again, month after month, year after year, detailing the systematic, relentless draining of funds from Rutherford Designs, operating accounts directly into the opaque abyss of VS Holdings, solidified the cold, brutal reality. This wasn't just negligence or poor oversight. This was a calculated, long-term conspiracy between Arthur and his brilliant, ambitious partner. Were they lovers? The emails I'd briefly glimpsed certainly hinted at an intimacy that went far beyond the boardroom, shared travel itineraries marked personal, overly familiar closing sentiments. But frankly, that possibility felt like a secondary, almost a mundane betrayal now, compared to the sheer scale of the financial treachery. The primary crime, the unforgivable sin, was the calculated, collaborative destruction of our shared creation. The methodical theft, not just of my past contribution, but of my rightful future security. I spent the next hour, fueled by a strange mixture of icy calm and trembling rage, meticulously photographing every crucial document with my phone: partnership agreement, inheritance transfer proof, key client letters acknowledging my role, the entire damning contents of the hobby expenses folder. Page by page, uploading the images immediately to the secure, heavily encrypted cloud account Sarah Jenkins, my forensic accountant contact, had helped me set up just days before. Access only through multi-factor authentication and disguised under an innocuous folder name related to my gardening hobby. My arsenal was complete. Returning the folders exactly as I'd found them, ensuring no trace of my intrusion remained, relocking the office door with a soft, final click, replacing the spare key in its literary hiding place. The fear was still there, a cold, watchful undercurrent awareness of the risks I was taking, but overlaid with something new, something powerful, a grim, unshakable determination. The ghost was armed. The invisible woman had found her voice, her proof. The cornerstone, ignored and buried for decades under the weight of his ego and ambition, was finally ready to demonstrate its load-bearing strength, ready to bring the whole rotten structure crashing down if necessary. The ensuing weeks unfolded like a high-stakes chess match, played out beneath a veneer of strained domestic tranquility. I became the very picture of the recovering, slightly detached, gently preoccupied wife. I rested diligently. I read novels with placid focus. I made polite, almost neutral inquiries about Arthur's demanding day at the office, careful always to keep my tone light, my expression unreadable. Inside, however, a different Helen was operating with chilling efficiency, cold, methodical, strategically gathering strength and refining her plan. My quiet hours, ostensibly spent reading gardening catalogs or napping to restore my energy, were actually consumed by meticulous planning, covert communication, and the gathering of final pieces of intelligence. My physiotherapy sessions, religiously attended 3 times a week, became my ironclad alibi for discreet meetings downtown. My therapist's bright, airy office was conveniently located just blocks away from the gleaming steel and glass towers of the financial district. During the hour, Arthur benevolently assumed I was working diligently on regaining strength and flexibility in my limbs under professional supervision. I was instead huddled in quiet coffee shops or anonymous hotel lobbies, meeting with Sarah Jenkins, the sharp, relentlessly thorough forensic accountant, and my newly retained lawyer, Miss Diane Holloway. Diane was a force of nature, a petite woman with eyes like steel traps and a reputation for eviscerating opposing counsel in complex financial litigation. She radiated competence and a controlled ferocity that I found immensely reassuring. "It's even worse than we initially suspected, Helen," Sarah confirmed grimly during one such clandestine meeting, sliding a sheaf of printouts across the table. Printouts detailing shell corporations linked to VS holdings in multiple offshore jurisdictions. These transfers are systematic, layered, carefully disguised through multiple entities. It's not just ethically questionable or grossly irregular. Parts of this structure strongly suggest deliberate money laundering and tax evasion. Veronica Shaw has built a complex, predatory web designed to drain the company dry over time. And Arthur, well, Sarah sighed, pushing her glasses up her nose. He either actively participated in constructing this scheme, or he demonstrated a level of willful blindness and staggering negligence that borders on criminal complicity itself. "Which do you believe it is?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, though I suspected I already knew the answer. The Arthur I knew, the man obsessed with control and appearances, wasn't negligent. He was deliberate. Sarah met my gaze directly, her expression a mixture of professional assessment and human sympathy. Honestly, based purely on this extensive paper trail, the authorizations required, the timing relative to Veronica's partnership, it looks like he knew. Maybe he didn't grasp the full criminal extent initially. Maybe Veronica manipulated him by appealing to his greed or his ego. But the evidence suggests he knowingly signed off on the initial diversions, perhaps viewing it as a clever way to minimize tax liabilities or build a secret retirement fund. The confirmation, though grimly expected, still landed like a physical blow, winding me. I leaned back against the stiff coffee shop chair, closing my eyes for a moment against the harsh fluorescent lights, against the harsh reality. So, I took a shaky breath. What are my options now, realistically? "Legally, you have several powerful avenues," Diane Holloway interjected, her voice crisp and businesslike, cutting through my momentary despair. As his wife of nearly 40 years, depending on how marital versus corporate assets are structured and titled, you have significant claims under divorce law, especially given his likely infidelity and financial misconduct. Secondly, as an unrecognized founding partner with clear documentality, she tapped the printout of my original partnership agreement. You have irrefutable grounds to sue for your rightful equity stake, plus accrued value over 30 years, a substantial sum. And thirdly, her eyes narrowed slightly, the financial misconduct, the potential fraud and embezzlement involving both Arthur and Ms. Shaw. That opens up a whole other, potentially explosive avenue. We can leverage that threat immensely. We need more granular information, Helen. Access to the full company servers, internal communications logs, Veronica's personal emails if possible. Impossible, I sighed, the word heavy with resignation. Arthur and Veronica control everything digitally. Passwords, firewalls. Not necessarily impossible, Sarah countered, a glint in her eye. There are ways, legal ways, subpoenas for electronic records, court-ordered discovery processes during litigation, digital forensics specialists. But, Diane added, her tone coming serious, it will get ugly, Helen, very ugly. It will likely become public. Arthur will fight back dirty. Are you absolutely prepared for that level of warfare? Was I? Was I prepared to potentially destroy the company I still, somewhere deep down, felt a shred of maternal pride for having nurtured? Prepared to tear down the entire glittering edifice of my life, the carefully constructed facade I had helped maintain for decades? Prepared to face the inevitable public scrutiny, the whispers, the judgments, prepared perhaps to see Arthur, the father of my son, the man I had once loved with youthful idealism, face not just professional disgrace, but potentially serious legal consequences. 2 years ago, lying weak and vulnerable in that hospital bed, the answer would have been a resounding, terrified no. Now, after staring death squarely in the face, after realizing the staggering depth of the betrayal. Yes, I said, my voice low but surprisingly firm, meeting Diane's intense gaze without flinching. I am. My quiet, clandestine investigation continued, now guided by Sarah's expertise. I leveraged Arthur's ingrained assumptions about my generation's technological ineptitude, installing discreet, legally permissible monitoring software on the shared home office computer during one of his extended critical strategy weekends. Away with Veronica, the irony wasn't lost on me. Recovered deleted files, analyzed metadata, tracked unusual logging patterns, emails between Arthur and Veronica, often using coded language or personal servers, revealed a clearer picture of their dynamic. Veronica, initially deferential, grew bolder over time, subtly manipulating Arthur, flattering his ego while simultaneously undermining his judgment, presenting ideas as her own that clearly built upon frameworks I had established years earlier. Arthur, initiality perhaps just flattered by her attention and ambition, seemed increasingly ensnared, sometimes questioning her more aggressive financial moves in early emails, but ultimately acquiescing, perhaps blinded by greed, perhaps infatuated, perhaps simply afraid of her now. He seemed less the master strategist and more the aging lion being gradually sidelined by a younger, hungrier predator he himself had invited into the pride. Was he a victim too, in a twisted way? Perhaps, but his initial fundamental betrayal of me, his willingness to erase my contribution and plan my disposal, had paved the treacherous path for his own potential downfall. Pity, I reminded myself sternly, was a dangerous luxury I could no longer afford. The tension in the house became almost unbearable, a thick, poisonous fog. Arthur sensed something was fundamentally amiss, though he couldn't pinpoint it. My newfound calm, my quiet self-possession felt unnatural, unnerving to him after decades of my anxious solicitude. He started questioning me more insistently, probing, watching me more closely when he thought I wasn't aware. "You seem different, Helen," he remarked one tense evening over a silent dinner I had dutifully prepared, but barely touched. "Preoccupied. Are you absolutely sure you're feeling all right? Perhaps we should book that extended trip to the Caribbean I mentioned. Just relax. Get away from everything." Translation: get me away from lawyers, accountants, and incriminating files. "Perfectly fine, Arthur," I replied smoothly, carefully buttering a piece of bread I had no intention of eating. "Just focusing on my recovery as you suggested, taking things slow, appreciating the quiet, my quiet war preparation." He didn't look convinced. His eyes narrowed, searching mine for the familiar deference, the flicker of anxiety in finding something else instead. Something he couldn't quite decipher, something that clearly unsettled him. Then came the email invitation, sent late on a Friday afternoon designed to minimize reaction time. An emergency board meeting called unilaterally by Arthur for the following Monday morning. Subject line stark and ominous: urgent strategic review and future planning. This was it, the preemptive strike. They intended to ram through their restructuring plan, solidify Veronica's illegitimate control, formally marginalized Arthur, perhaps setting him up for a graceful retirement later, and definitively erase me from any future equation, all under the guise of urgent corporate necessity. They thought I would be at home, frail, oblivious, tending my roses, so they were about to discover just how resilient illness and 30 years of righteous simmering betrayal had made. The weekend was a blur of intense final preparations, hours spent on secure video calls with Diane and Sarah, reviewing the sequence of revelations, preparing my concise, impactful statement, ensuring all digital copies of the critical evidence were securely backed up in multiple locations and instantly accessible to Diane. My dear friend Joanne, sensing the impending storm without knowing the details, brought over homemade soup and offered unwavering, unquestioning support. "Whatever it is you're facing, Helen," she'd said, her warm hand covering mine, her eyes full of fierce loyalty, "you remember who you are. You've got this. You are stronger than anyone knows." Her simple, unwavering faith was a quiet, vital anchor in the turbulent emotional storm gathering within me. Monday morning. The boardroom at Rutherford Designs, located on the penthouse floor of one of the city's most prestigious down towers, radiated expensive, understated, intimidating power, gleaming football field-length mahogany table reflecting the skyline, plush Italian leather chairs that cost more than my first car, abstract veilery menacing modern art. The usual faces were arranged around the table, the stoic, mostly older board members representing decades of interwoven corporate interest, the firm's anxious in-house legal counsel looking particularly pale, Arthur standing stiffly at the head of the table, trying to project command but looking unusually strained, and Veronica Shaw seated beside him, a vision in severe charcoal gray, radiating a brittle, almost electric confidence that didn't quite mask the predatory gleam in her eye. They were a united front, meticulously prepared, ready to dictate the terms of the company's future and my erasure. My entrance, precisely 5 minutes after the scheduled start time, caused a visible, almost audible ripple through the room. Heads turned sharply. Low conversations halted abruptly mid-sentence. Arthur, who had just begun his opening remarks, froze mid-word, his face going slack with disbelief, then hardening instantly into a mask of controlled fury. Veronica's reaction was even more pronounced. Her eyes widened fractionally in pure, unadulterated shock, quickly followed by a narrowing into icy slits of undisguised hostility. Surprise, disbelief, then pure, incandescent rage flowed from her like a palpable, freezing wave across the room. The junior board members looked utterly confused. The older ones, the ones who remembered the firm's humbler beginnings, looked suddenly in. "Helen," Arthur's voice was dangerously low, tight with anger barely restrained by the shocked presence of the board. "What is the meaning of this intrusion? This is a closed board meeting. You were not invited. You have no standing here." "Haven't I?" I walked slowly, deliberately, down the length of the polished mahogany table, my sensible heels clicking firmly, rhythmically on the imported marble floor. The sound seemed unnaturally loud, almost accusatory in the sudden, complete quiet. I ignored the empty chairs along the sides and proceeded directly to the single unoccupied seat, directly opposite Arthur at the far end of the table, symbolically mirroring his position of power. I placed my worn, familiar leather satchel, the one I used to carry files in during those first 10 years, on the gleaming table with deliberate, quiet care. "Forgive my lack of invitation, Arthur," considering the agenda likely involves the fundamental future planning of a company I dedicated 30 years of my life, my professional skills, my financial acumen, and indeed my personal inheritance to building from the ground up. I assumed my presence, my input, would be not just welcome, but absolutely essential. A low murmur rippled around the table. Eyes shifted uneasily. Veronica leaned towards Arthur, whispering something urgently, furiously into his ear. He shook his head slightly, visibly struggling to regain control of the room, of the narrative. "Gentlemen," he started again, forcing a semblance of his usual confident tone. As I was starting to outline before this interruption, Veronica and I have developed a comprehensive, forward-thinking proposal designed to streamline operations, leverage exciting new market opportunities, and strategically position Rutherford Designs for significant growth in the next decade. An admirable goal, Arthur, undoubtedly, I interrupted again, my voice calm but clear, cutting cleanly through his practiced corporate bluster. But before we begin erecting new floors, shouldn't we first ascertain the structural integrity of the existing foundation, ensure it's sound, ensure it can actually bear the weight of these ambitious future plans? Perhaps, I continued, my voice taking on a slightly harder edge, a brief review of the company's actual history, the part conveniently omitted from the anniversary celebrations, is in order? The faded green cloth-bound ledgers landed first, placed squarely in the center of the table. Their worn covers, their sheer physicality, seemed an almost shocking contrast to the sleek tablets and digital displays favored by the other board members. The complete original financials, 1993 through 2003, I announced clearly, my voice steady despite the frantic pounding in my chest, documenting every single transaction, every hard-won client secured, every looming financial crisis averted through sheer grit and sleepless nights. Please note, particularly, I tapped a specific dog-eared page in the 1998 ledger, the crucial capital injection of $50,000, recorded in Q2, sourced directly from the life insurance policy of Helen Marsden, my maiden name, my personal funds, my contribution that single-handedly prevented imminent bankruptcy when traditional financing had dried up. Mr. Henderson, the elderly but still sharp representative from their oldest, largest client, leaned forward, adjusting his thick glasses, peering intently at the ledger entry. "I remember that time distinctly," he murmured, his voice gravelly with age and authority. "Tough year for everyone in development. Arthur seemed absolutely certain you were going under then, told me so himself." Arthur paled visibly at this unexpected corroboration. Next, I produced the folders containing the foundational contracts and key client correspondence. Contracts for Henderson Hotels, the Kensington Group portfolio, the City Revitalization Project Phase 1. I continued, laying them out methodically, like a prosecutor presenting irrefutable exhibits. All negotiated and finalized, often solely by myself during Mr. Rutherford's frequent and sometimes prolonged absences for creative retreats or site inspection. I paused, letting that sink in. Supported, I added, tapping the thick stacks of letters, by extensive correspondence from satisfied, high-proficient clients, specifically acknowledging my role in project management, budget oversight, and critical crisis resolution. I picked up one letter, its paper brittle with age, from Mayor Davies himself, thanking Helen Marsden for her invaluable assistance and critical role in salvaging the waterfront development negotiations. I looked directly at Arthur, just keeping the home fires burning. "Arthur?" or perhaps acting as de facto chief operating officer while you focused on the design awards. His face was now a dangerous, mottled red and white. He looked trapped, cornered, like an animal realizing the walls of its cage were closing in. Veronica, seeing him flounder, attempted a swift, dismissive counterattack. "This is entirely irrelevant ancient history," she snapped, her voice sharp, cutting. "Sentimental distractions. The firm operates on a completely different global scale now thanks to modern, forward-thinking strategies developed under my guidance." "Ah, yes, modern strategies," I echoed, my voice dropping, taking on a chillingly soft quality that seemed to command even more attention than shouting would have. "Contemporary approaches. Like these." The deceptively slim hobby expenses folder landed on the table with a final, definitive thud. Its seemingly innocuous label contrasted sharply with the explosive potential of its contents. I flipped it open, revealing the crisp, damning bank statements, copies neatly arranged. "Shall we discuss VS Holdings, a shell corporation conveniently registered in the Cayman Islands, established by Ms. Shaw shortly before she was elevated to partner status? Shall we discuss the consistent, substantial six-figure transfers flowing monthly from Rutherford Design's primary operating accounts directly into this entity, cleverly disguised initially as strategic consulting fees?" This time the gasp around the table was sharp, audible. Board members exchanged shocked, disbelieving glances. The company lawyer looked physically ill, as if he might actually vomit onto the polished mahogany. "Or perhaps," I continued relentlessly, my gaze locking onto Veronica's now chalky white face, her composure finally irrevocably shattered, "we should discuss the demonstrably inflated invoices submitted by suppliers exclusively connected to Miss Shaw, or the numerous ghost projects, complete with fabricated budgets and reports, apparently used solely to siphon substantial funds out of the company, the systematic, calculated bleeding of the company's hard-earned asset." "This is outrageous," Veronica finally exploded, finding her voice, though it trembled with fury and fear. "These are baseless lies, fabrications you have absolutely no proof." "No proof?" I raised a questioning eyebrow, my voice remaining dangerously quiet. "These are official bank records, Miss Shaw. International transfer confirmations, incorporation documents for VS Holdings listing you as the sole director and beneficiary, all legally obtained." I paused for effect. "Along with supporting internal emails, server logs indicating deliberate file deletion attempts, and accounting discrepancies retrieved from company servers, evidence I have already taken the liberty of forwarding, purely as a matter of fiduciary responsibility, you understand, to Miss Sarah Jenkins of Sterling Forensic Accounting for independent analysis, and given the potential scale and international nature of these irregularities," I added, my gaze sweeping the stunned faces of the board members. "Also alerted the Regional Enforcement Office of the Securities and Exchange Commission to certain financial activities requiring their immediate regulatory attention." Checkmate. Utter, devastating checkmate. The air left the room entirely. Arthur slumped heavily in his chair, as if his strings had been cut, looking suddenly old, frail, utterly defeated. Veronica stared at me, pure, undiluted venom radiating from her eyes, but she was trapped, silenced, utterly powerless. The board members looked between the damning documents, the disgraced CEO, the exposed partner in me, the quiet, dismissed wife who had just calmly detonated a nuclear bomb in their midst. The full implications: financial fraud, corporate embezzlement, international money laundering conspiracy, professional ruin, potential criminal charges, began to dawn with sickening, terrifying clarity on every face around the table. "Now," I said, my voice soft again but utterly commanding the absolute silence, "perhaps we can begin to discuss the real future of this firm, a future built, for a change, on truth, not on convenient lies and calculated omissions, a future that fully acknowledges all foundational contributions." My eyes swept pointedly over Arthur's bowed head, "and takes immediate steps to secure the company's actual remaining assets." My gaze landed with cold precision on Veronica's frozen expression. "And ensures appropriate, substantial compensation is made forthwith." I paused, letting the unspoken threat hang heavy and potent in the air. "Or," I gestured almost casually towards the damning document spread across the table, "we can simply adjourn this meeting and allow the auditors, the forensic accountants, and the federal authorities to complete their undoubtedly thorough inquiry." My eyes locked with Arthur's, holding his terrified gaze. "And Miss Shaw is entirely yours." The cornerstone, ignored, dismissed, and deliberately buried for decades under the suffocating weight of male ego, ambition, and betrayal, had not just spoken. It had brought the entire corrupted, unstable structure crashing down around their ears. The aftermath was less a sudden explosion and more the slow, grinding, inevitable collapse of a condemned building. The emergency board meeting dissolved into hushed, panicked sidebars and urgent calls to external legal counsel. Sterling Forensic Accounting, armed with my preliminary documentation and full board cooperation, quickly confirmed everything I had alleged, uncovering an even more extensive and audacious network of shell corporations, falsified invoices, and diverted funds than I had initially realized. Veronica Shaw, facing overwhelming evidence of potentially criminal fraud and likely years of litigation, vanished literally overnight. Her resignation was quietly accepted. Rumors quickly circulated within the industry, unsubstantiated but widely believed, about her fleeing the country under a false passport, leaving behind a trail of angry creditors and shattered professional connections. Her meteoric rise, built on calculated ambition and brazen deceit, ended in an equally precipitous. Arthur, stripped of his CEO title, his signing authority revoked, facing the abyss of professional disgrace and the very real threat of legal action from shareholders and potentially even criminal investigation, chose the path of least resistance. His fight, his bluster, his lifelong sense of entitlement evaporated completely. Our divorce negotiations, handled coolly and efficiently by Diane Holloway, were almost perfunctory. Arthur sat opposite me at the lawyer's polished conference table, looking gray, diminished, utterly broken. He knew he had no leverage. He agreed without contest to all my terms. The house free and clear, which I intended to sell immediately, a settlement representing not just a standard spousal share, but a significantly larger portion, reflecting my proven initial capital investment, 30 years of sweat equity valued at executive rates, and punitive damages implicitly tied to his complicity in the financial misconduct, a binding, irrevocable share of his drastically reduced pension and retirement funds. Perhaps most symbolically important to me, a signed, notarized, legally binding statement, drafted by Diane, acknowledging my foundational partnership role in Rutherford Designs from its inception, specifically detailing my key contributions to be lodged permanently within the official, albeit now defunct, company archive. He signed the papers with a shaking hand, his signature, once bold and flamboyant, now reduced to a spidery, hesitant scrawl. He avoided my eyes throughout the entire process. He looked every one of his 70 years, and perhaps 100 more. We sold the house quickly, accepting the first reasonable offer. Neither of us could bear to set foot in it again, saturated as it was with the ghosts of shared dreams turned into nightmares, haunted by too many unspoken resentments and bitter betrayals. With my substantial settlement secured, providing not just financial security but absolute, untethered freedom, I bought a smaller, light-filled condominium overlooking the city park. A space chosen entirely by me, for me, filled with my things, reflecting my taste, my peace. Michael, our son, now a successful lawyer in his own right, remained distant, entrenched in his loyalty to the father figure he thought he knew. That one furious phone call after the board meeting. "You didn't have to destroy him, Mom. You took everything," had been our last substantive conversation. Attempts at reconciliation were met with polite, strained finality. He couldn't, or wouldn't, see past the narrative his father had spun for decades. The pain of that estrangement was real, a deep, lingering ache in a corner of my heart. But it no longer defined my existence. I had chosen the harsh light of truth over the comfortable shadows of illusion, chosen my own survival and self-respect over the suffocating demands of familiar loyalty to a fundamentally flawed ideal. If Michael couldn't understand or accept that necessary, painful choice, it was his burden to carry, his loss to process, not mine to endlessly apologize. 3 years have passed since the implosion, 3 years of quiet rebuilding, not of a company, but of a life. My life. My hair is completely silver now, cut short in a style that requires minimal fuss, easy to manage whether I'm working in my studio or hiking in the mountains. The tremor in my hand vanished completely within months of the divorce being finalized, replaced by a steady, confident touch on the paintbrush, the keyboard, the steering wheel. My heart? According to a beaming Dr. Fisher at my last annual checkup, it's stronger, healthier, more resilient than it's been in 20 years. "Whatever you're doing, Helen, keep doing it," he'd chuckled, reviewing my EKG with satisfaction. "Contentment seems to be the best medicine after all." And I am content, deeply, quietly, unexpectedly content. More than content, actually. I am joyful, a word I hadn't associated with myself for decades. My days unfold now according to my own rhythm, not dictated by Arthur's schedule or the demands of a company that tried to consume me whole. My art studio, occupying the sunniest, largest room in the condominium, the room with the best view of the park's changing seasons, is my true sanctuary now. Vases lean against the walls, vibrant with color, capturing not just landscapes seen on my travels, the impossible blues of the Aegean Sea, the misty greens of the Scottish Highlands, the stark, sun-drenched beauty of the New Mexico desert, but also the internal landscapes I'm finally free to explore. Places I finally visited, not as Arthur Rutherford's tastefully dressed, silently supportive wife, but as Helen Marsden Rutherford, artist, observer, curious pilgrim rediscovering her own life's path. My first small gallery show last year, organized with trembling excitement and considerable encouragement from Joanne and my art group, was both terrifying and profoundly exhilarating. Seeing my work displayed on clean white walls, hearing strangers respond not just politely but with genuine emotion to something I had created from my own vision, my own experience, it was a form of validation far more profound, more soul-deep than any reflected glory from Arthur's architectural awards had ever been. I continued to volunteer at the women's shelter, expanding the financial literacy workshops I started, sharing my story, carefully anonymized but emotionally resonant, helps other women recognize the insidious patterns of financial control and emotional manipulation, empowering them to understand their own worth, tangible and intangible, and to protect their futures before it's too late. Helping them feels like paying forward the hard-won clarity I gained through devastating personal experience. It feels like healing a fractured part of myself, transforming pain into purpose. Joanne and my other friends, my chosen family, forged through shared interests, mutual respect, and genuine affection, are the constants in my life now. We share simple, delicious dinners where the conversation flows freely and honestly. We attend theater openings, explore quirky museum exhibits, take long, invigorating walks in the park. Together, we talk. We laugh frequently and loudly. We support each other through life's inevitable bumps and bruises, job losses, aging parents, health. There is an ease, an authenticity, an unwavering bedrock of loyalty in these relationships that was tragically, fatally absent for so long in the gilded cage of my marriage. Arthur? I heard indirectly through George Hansen, who still calls occasionally with gruff affection to check in. Just making sure you're not letting those arty types lead you astray, Helen. That he lives quietly, almost reclusively, in a high-end managed care facility now, his physical health declining rapidly, his memory reportedly failing. No regular visitors to speak of, George said sadly, a lonely, diminished end to a life built so carefully, so arrogantly, on a foundation of profound self-deception and the callous betrayal of others. Hearing this, I felt a brief, fleeting flicker of something complex, not pity exactly, perhaps just a weary, detached acknowledgement of shared history, of human frailty, of the ultimate futility of his ambition. But no regret, not a shred. Last week, while sorting through a box of old keepsakes, deciding what to keep, what to release, I came across the tarnished silver locket. My long-dead mother-in-law's cherished heirloom, the one Walter had stolen all those years ago, the one Arthur had anonymously, silently returned in a plain, padded envelope months after the divorce was finalized. A final, pathetic, wordless gesture, an apology, a desperate bid for some kind of absolution? I'll never know. I held it in my palm for a long moment, weighing its complicated history, its freight of deceit and loss. Then, decisively, I placed it not back in the box with my own mother's locket and my grandmother's treasured brooch, symbols of genuine love and female resilience, but in a separate, clearly labeled envelope addressed to the curator of the local historical society, along with a certified copy of the notarized statement acknowledging my foundational partnership role in Rutherford Designs. Let history have it all. Let the public record stand clear and unambiguous. Let the truth, finally, be the final word. I am Helen Rutherford, 71 years old, artist, traveler, mentor, volunteer, survivor, cornerstone. My life, finally, irrevocably, is built entirely on foundations of my own careful, deliberate making, and they are solid. They are sound. They are true. The view from my window this morning is breathtakingly beautiful. The sun is rising, painting the park trees gold, and for the first time in longer than I can possibly remember, my future feels entirely, gloriously, limitlessly mine.